It's been 2 weeks since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, and it appears Americans broadly support taking a tough stance against Moscow's aggression. But what exactly does that entail? What are the limits? Well, let's just say higher gas prices could be the least of our problems if we implement a no-fly zone. Friends, it's time for Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. It was inevitable. We are seeing more and more images of horrific scenes in Ukraine, civilians who are dying because of shelling, because of airstrikes, Russian military continuing its onslaught against Ukraine, and emotions even here and in the rest of the West around the world are running high over it, and people are saying something needs to be done. Well, that's a big question. What does that entail? What are we actually willing to do in order to guarantee the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine, a country that is thousands of miles away and one in which the U.S. has no specific treaty obligation to defend? Well, according to Reuters, we've got some polling data on this. American support for Ukrainians, a no-fly zone, 74% want a no-fly zone. Take refugees, 74%. Provide weapons, 72%. And pay more for gas, 64%. Now, some of these, it seems, are far less controversial and much more straightforward. Things like, for example, a willingness to pay more for gas. To that, I would ask, how much more? And what is actually the price that somebody would start to say, well, I don't want to pay that much? $150 a barrel? $200 a barrel? If it costs you $100, $200 to fill up your tank of gas every time you go, is that the price you want to pay for Ukraine? And also all of your products, goods and services, everything is more expensive. You are effectively poorer as a result of this. Do you want to do that? That's what the American people are faced with right now. But let's specifically dive into the no-fly zone component of this. First off, there is the possibility here of a no-fly zone leading to something much bigger. That's the greatest concern would be a full-fledged war in Europe. So we'll start with the worst-case scenario, and then I'll build backwards from that to what it would mean just even in the opening salvo. Here's Secretary of State Blinken on the no-fly zone. Watch.
The only way to actually implement something like a no-fly zone is to send NATO planes into Ukrainian airspace and to shoot down Russian planes, and that could lead to a full-fledged war in Europe. President Biden has been clear that we are not going to get into a war with Russia, but we are going to tremendous lengths with allies and partners to provide Ukrainians with the means to effectively defend themselves.
He's right on this point about what a no-fly zone would actually entail. It's not a no-fly zone. It's actually a lot of flying by U.S. and NATO planes that would be involved to keep that airspace secure and free of Russian jets. But it wouldn't be that simple, because the Russians would continue to fly in that airspace and would view any presence of U.S. or NATO planes as a hostile act and would either wait until we shot one of them down, because that's what you have to do for a no-fly zone, or would just open fire at our or our allies' planes first. And then beyond that, what happens when we decide that we're going to have air bases in the region that are playing host to these planes that are flying there for the no-fly zone? Does Putin start firing missiles at them? That's the reality of what a no-fly zone would look like. We've not done a no-fly zone in a country where there is a hostile force on the other side with advanced planes that can actually shoot down our planes, not to mention Russian surface-to-air missile systems like the S-300, 400, and 500, which at their maximum can go hundreds of miles to target either drones, manned or unmanned vehicles in the sky. So this is a very serious issue, very serious problem. So let's just take a step back from the no-fly zone, because of course it could also lead to a full-scale war and even nuclear exchange, which would be the nightmare scenario that we're trying to avoid in Russia. But in the meantime, because even the Democrat administration says they don't want to do that, what are we willing to do economically? Because right now we have a cognitive dissonance here. We want to cripple the Russian economy so they stop the Russian war machine, but we're not willing to go after the single lifeblood issue of the Russian economy, oil and natural gas, the fossil fuel component of its economy, Jen Psaki is saying, look, this is why the White House is resisting that. Play it.
We are looking at options we could take right now to cut U.S. consumption of Russian energy, but we are very focused on minimizing the impact to families. If you reduce supply in the global marketplace, you are going to raise gas prices. You're going to raise the price of oil, and that is something the president is very mindful of and focused on.
You're going to rise the price of oil. You're going to make the economy look really bad in this country for a while. And Democrats, as much as they're willing to be authoritarian lunatics when it comes to COVID and really anything, they like power. And they know that there would be a big problem for them going into the midterms if we have oil at $150 or $200 a barrel. That's going to be a nightmare scenario for them, politically speaking here. That's why they're holding back from all this. Otherwise, if it meant they could keep more seats in Congress, Nancy Pelosi would be calling for the bombing of Moscow tomorrow. They don't care. There's no principles involved here, except for power. They want to stay in charge. Jen Psaki, meanwhile, wants to say that instead of producing more, which we know we can do that here at home, they want us to focus on reducing dependence on fossil fuels in general. Watch.
The best thing we can do is reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and foreign oil because that will help us have a reliable source of energy so that we're not worried about gas prices going up because of the whims of a foreign dictator.
Right, and you guys think that asking Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or Iran is reducing our dependence on foreign oil?
That's actually, I just outlined each of those specific scenarios and the range of discussions that we're having with each of those countries. I don't think anybody is advocating for Iran to continue acquiring a nuclear weapon, perhaps except for the former president who pulled us out of the deal.
I mean, what she says doesn't even make sense. It's hard to analyze because it's just absurd. I would add to all of this, though, that they are looking at perhaps getting rid of the sanctions on Venezuelan oil. Because, you know, Maduro and the socialist lunatics running that country, that's gone so well. And Iran, where they're trying to get a nuclear deal. So because we can't have Russian oil, maybe we'll go to other dictatorships that also cause problems for us in the geopolitical scene, all because we can't produce oil at home, because their oil is not gross and bad. Our oil in America that we produce here is gross and bad. What? It makes no sense. But this is the climate change religion coming into full display here. People can actually see how absurd all of this is and how unhelpful it is to have at least a portion of the Democrat Party that really calls the shots, the environmentalist wackos of the left, determining that we can't do what's in our geopolitical and economic and national security interest by producing more fossil fuel because they think the world's going to end, it's going to melt because of the CO2 in the air. These people are out of their minds, but we're dealing with a crazy Democrat Party. There's no question about that. Meanwhile, back in Ukraine and in the situation with Russia, the actual situation of the hostilities, the Russians have put out terms for a halt in these hostilities, and that would include a cessation of military action from the Ukrainians. Ukraine must change its constitution to enshrine neutrality, acknowledge Crimea as Russian territory, and recognize the separatist republics of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states. So that is the list of demands. You could say this would be negotiating with terrorists. You could say this is unfair, and it certainly is unfair. But is it the right move at this point for Ukraine to say, all right, let's stop this before we lose more lives, and let's figure out what the future actually looks like dealing with an aggressive Russia that has already taken pieces of Ukraine? Is that the way forward? Well, in the meantime, Vice President Harris is traveling to Poland and Romania because when you have a really massively important problem with lives and perhaps even civilization itself at stake, send Kamala Harris. Yeah, she's going to fix it. Biden administration is a deeply unfunny joke. We'll have more of the situation on the ground in Ukraine with senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Brett Sadler, when we come back. But first, I want to talk to you about protecting your online data. A lot of companies promise that your privacy is guaranteed, but we know that's not true. That's why you need a new privacy and cybersecurity application tool called Secure. Spelled S-E-K-U-R, Secure is using proprietary encryption and is offering secure instant messaging and email. With Secure, all of your communication is based on servers and data centers hosted in Switzerland without using any of the big tech platforms. Privacy is a big issue now. Without real security, people can read your emails, messages, and even your bank information. Secure will never mine your data and never ask for your phone number. You can send emails to your doctor, banker, lawyer, or anyone else with total confidence you're not being spied on by your internet provider or big tech. Secure is your solution to stop the constant theft of your digital identity. Costs only $5 for the messenger, only $10 for the messenger and email combination package. Go to secure.com and take back your privacy today. That's secur.com. Use promo code BUCK for 25% off, and we'll be right back with more Hold the Line. It's now day 12 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russian forces continue to lay siege to major cities, in some cases dropping ordnance among the civilian population. According to the United Nations, more than 406 civilians have been killed and a further 800 injured in Ukraine since the Russian offensive began. Meanwhile, Ukrainians continue to mount a fierce resistance against the Russian onslaught. Moscow has already paid a heavy price for the invasion, losing hundreds of tanks and other vehicles during the 2-week-old conflict. Joining me now to give his insight into what's happening on the ground in Ukraine is 26-year naval veteran and senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Brent Sadler. Brent, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me on today.
So let's start with this. We're deeper into this than in the early days, where it seemed like a big focus of the news coverage, the reporting, was on the Ukrainian resistance, much stronger than anticipated and doing much better. That was, let's say, the first 72 hours. Let's start with that reality. What's true, what's not? How is it going for the Ukrainian military and militia that is fighting against this Russian invasion? How is it actually stacking up?
So aside from the fact that I think Putin and his top generals definitely miscalculated on the resolve of the Ukrainian people and their military to stand their ground, I'm not sure it's knocked them far enough off their planned operations to really significantly change the trajectory of what we see on the ground right now. And so the second phase that we're in right now, this is the siege warfare. The next phase will be to isolate Ukraine diplomatically and also militarily, and then continue to strangle them into submission. And so we'll see how long that goes. I think a key factor that is how stiff a resolve the Ukrainian military and people are to be able to put up against the Russians in this next third phase, this kind of wearing each other down phase.
And how much have the anti-tank missiles, the shoulder-fired missiles, like the Javelin anti-tank system, and other munitions that the West has brought into the conflict and given to the Ukrainians, has that surprised the Russians dramatically? Were they prepared for this? I mean, essentially, is there a possibility here of slowing this down to the point where the Russians decide to sue for peace? Because that's what everyone's wondering about right now. I mean, how do they actually see the ground war in terms of their ultimate aims and the list that they've put out for negotiation?
I think we're shifting into an attrition battle. Can the Russians maintain a significant military force in Ukraine while withering whatever resistance the Ukrainian people are able to put up? And that's a function of how many of these weapons and capabilities are able to continue to flow into Ukraine, how many that the West is willing to also offer. The current discussion right now is centering around MiG-29s being on offer from Poland. That would significantly plus up the Ukrainian Air Force and the losses they've suffered so far. So these type of things actually go into prolonging the duration of the conflict. And I think the longer that the Ukrainian people are able to stay in the fight, the worse it is for the Russians and the more likely they have to negotiate. We're seeing some indications of that, but I don't think it's been long enough yet. Again, captured documents, battlefield documents, and some military experts that have been also commenting on this all kind of focus in around 2 weeks of planned operations. So we're still within the window of planned operations from the Russian perspective. And I wouldn't be too quick to say that the losses, while high by Western standards, may not be high enough from a Russian military planner's side to warrant a change of approach.
And what do we need to know at this phase about the aerial threat to Ukrainian forces? Because there's so much talk right now, Brent, about whether there should be a no-fly zone or not. And the Biden administration so far has said absolutely not. That can yield, that could result in a full-scale war with Russia. So assuming there isn't a no-fly zone, what is being done and what can be done by the Ukrainians to try to deal with the tremendous superiority in the air that the Russian Federation's military can bring to bear?
So I'm not sure that Russia has attained air superiority yet. Ukraine's air defenses are still functioning. The daily reports that Department of Defense is making that very clear. And I think the supplying of the additional MiG-29s would probably help bolster that. So it's still very much contested airspace. If the Russians actually did put the full force of their Air Force into the fight, it may change things very rapidly. And then that would provide them uncontested air control. And
Is it your,
that
is it
actually
your
allows-
expectation, Brent, that they will do that? That that's part of the escalation plan that Putin and his top military advisors have? They'll put more planes in the sky so that they have total air dominance?
Yes, they're not trained for as joint operations, air with ground coordinated operations. So you move your ground air defenses into position as you lay siege to the cities, and then you flow your air forces in and you coordinate by time and space. It's the simplest way to do it. So I think it's just a matter of time before they get all their defenses in position, and then you'll see more Air Force power coming in.
What should people know about a no-fly zone? Both what that would take to implement, and what do you see as the Russian response in terms of probability? I know we don't know for sure, but what do you think would happen?
Well, I think the option for a no-fly zone was passed months ago. It should have been part of the deterrent acts that the administration took. Sadly, now inserting a no-fly zone in a contested airspace against a nuclear-armed peer competitor in Russia is inherently escalatory and dangerous, and would have to expect that there'd be losses. That actually could lead to a series of events that are uncontrollable. So I think the window for doing that's long since passed. That being said, there's a lot of creative things that can be done that you could have a de facto no-fly zone, long-range surface-to-air missiles, think like Patriot batteries, the use of air early warning from NATO countries providing information to Ukrainian forces. Now, this requires a degree of command and control and communication that we haven't practiced or seen demonstrated to yet. So it'd be very complex in a peacetime, very hard in a wartime situation.
Is there any scenario in which you feel the Russians will not be able to achieve, if they stay in the fight, and again, absent a U.S. intervention such as a no-fly zone? We'll take that off the chessboard for a second here, Brent. Is there any scenario in which you think the Ukrainians are able to force a Russian withdrawal without their objectives achieved militarily?
No, absolutely. There's still a lot of fight in Ukraine. The Russians still have a lot of firepower, absolutely. But the morale that we're seeing of the Russian troops, we're seeing some indications, not uniformly, but some indication morale is not what it should be or needs to be. And then the Russian people, they are in a state of shock that their country is involved in this war. We're getting anecdotal reports of protests and people being put in jail. But I can tell you from my perspective and insight into the Russian people, again, watching their news, listening to what they're saying leading up to this, I don't think they had any expectations that they would be, in a fight with the Ukrainian people. So
there's also been some reporting. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Brent. I just want to ask, because I know you're a longtime Navy guy. There's been reporting about possible anti-ship missiles, because part of this offensive from the Russians has involved the Black Sea, the Sea of Azov, and the deployment of amphibious forces. What would that look like? And do you think that's a good idea, giving anti-ship missiles to the Ukrainians to actually be able to engage Russian ships offshore?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, quietly in the background, I've been saying the same thing for quite some time. It's the same type of a weapon system to be offered to the people in Taiwan to defend themselves against a Chinese invasion as well. So what I haven't seen is reporting on the use of these systems. The Ukrainians actually have one, an indigenously built one called Neptune. No reports that they've deployed it. It wasn't due to be in full operational capacity until April. But the likelihood they have a few units available, probably pretty high, but no reporting that they've used it. We did get, and there has been some reporting of a Russian patrol vessel, small warship, that was attacked and damaged by a rocket launching system, an army system. So there's still a potential there, but it's been relatively quiet on the naval front, at least from information.
All right, Brent, thanks for the expertise. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you very much.
Western nations have slapped major sanctions on Russia, but many leaders, including Joe Biden, remain unwilling to hit Putin where it would hurt the most, banning Russian oil and gas imports. Coming up, former U.S. Department of Energy official Ed McGuinness is going to join us to make sense of all that. But first, let's talk about protecting the most valuable asset you own. How devastated would you be if a criminal stole all the equity in your home? This crime is happening all over the U.S., and there's one company standing between you and these thieves: Home Title Lock. The FBI calls home title fraud one of the fastest growing crimes, which is why you need to go to HomeTitleLock.com, America's leader in home title protection. Here's the problem. The deed to your home is the only document that proves you own it, and the deeds to all our homes are online now. In minutes, a criminal can forge your name off the deed to your home and refile as the new owner. The crime can cause you to spend a fortune in legal fees when thieves take out loans in your name. It can even lead to eviction. Common identity theft services do not protect you from this crime. HomeTitleLock.com is your peace of mind that the deed to your home is protected. Visit HomeTitleLock.com. Again, that's HomeTitleLock.com. Ed McGinnis joins when we come back. Some bad news to start the week. The U.S. gas price has reached a national average of $4 per gallon, the highest in over a decade. This as the Biden administration now considers banning imports of Russian oil. Watch.
We are now talking to our European partners and allies to look in a coordinated way at the prospect of banning the import of Russian oil while making sure that there is still an appropriate supply of oil on world markets. That's a very active discussion as we speak.
Joining me now to discuss, Edward McGinnis, former acting assistant secretary for nuclear energy and CEO of the nuclear innovation and technology development company Curio. Ed, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure to be here, Bud.
So let's start with this. How bad are these gas prices versus what we've seen? I mean, the national average right now, we had 1 year ago, $2.77, a month ago, $3.44, a week ago, $3.61, today, $4.07. My understanding is the highest in pure dollar terms, not adjusted for inflation, was $4.10 back in 2008. So these prices seem pretty high, right? I mean, well, what's going on here?
Indeed, it looks like we're flirting with record prices now. I'm certainly not an oil and gas expert. As you know, I'm in the nuclear field, and I've been working in the field for almost 30 years, but I can certainly relate to the escalating prices, in particular when you are impacted by geostrategic adversaries who at times have locks and certainly a determinative role in the pricing, because we've allowed, frankly, in the past ourselves to get in this very position.
Now, specifically, so, okay, with gas, there's a big debate right now in the country over how we could, first of all, what should we do vis-a-vis Russia and how we could get more gas online. There's possible overtures from administration to Iran, to Venezuela, to the Saudis, right? So put that aside for a second. Some people are pointing out that nuclear energy, which is your direct area of expertise, Ed, could really be helpful here. Elon Musk, who certainly knows something about power and batteries and all of that, tweeted out, hopefully it is now extremely obvious that Europe should restart dormant nuclear power stations and increase power output of existing ones. This is critical to our national and international security. Where are we on the nuclear issue? And how much of the shortfall, or really a better way of putting this, how much of our energy do we get and could we get from nuclear if there was a policy decision to shift toward it?
Well, worldwide, 10% of the electricity is from nuclear. Within the United States, 20% of our electricity comes from nuclear. And if you put it in a clean electricity generation perspective, in the United States, over 50% of all electricity that is considered non-carbon emitting is from nuclear. If you pivot to Europe and you see what is happening, some countries like France have absolutely wisely seen the value of nuclear. It's a geostrategic issue. It's an energy security issue, and it can also contribute to climate priorities. But Germany, I would say they're still on this illogical path, unfortunately, of shutting down a prize fleet of 33 nuclear reactors. They only have, I understand, 3 left that's operating, and they're doing this in the face of pushing themselves towards dependence on Russian national gas, which to me makes no sense.
Just last week, Senator Marco Rubio commented on the energy crisis that's unfolding right now and said that he supports nuclear energy, and he addressed the issue of safety. I want to have his comments played for you, Ed, and then we'll come back and talk to us about this.
I have no problem with renewables. I have no problem with carbon capture. I have no problem with being able to find alternative ways of generating energy.
You support nuclear energy?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it can be done safely, as we prove every single day in this country and around the world. And it's one of the big mistakes some of the countries in Europe have made. They've walked away from nuclear energy, which is a clean source of energy. Obviously, the issue there is always where do you put the waste? But the truth of the matter is it is a very clean way to generate energy, very reliable, and it can be done safely, as we do every single day in this country in multiple sites.
So, Ed, what is the truth of that in terms of safety and the downside of it? Why have some governments, including our own, either somewhat or largely turned away from nuclear as a means of trying to get away from fossil fuel?
Well, nuclear reactors today are the safest they've ever been in our history. Nuclear reactors, certainly in the United States, have never gone through greater scrutiny to look at and prepare for any and all scenarios with regards to interruptions and challenges to the safety. So I feel very comfortable, very confident that not only in the U.S., but certainly in Europe too, there is a very stringent regulatory system to ensure our nuclear reactors are run safely. The next generation of reactors that are coming in the market now, they take an even greater step of safety to the point of what we call passive safety design systems. Literally, if you lose power, electricity to cool the reactor, if you have no human intervention like a plant operator coming in, these next generation reactors are designed to shut down passively and safely. So I agree with the senator that on the safety issue, that these reactors are safe. And I would say it's based on a legacy of policies going back to Carter that has set us on this path where we are not valuing nuclear energy, and certainly not as the multiple value proposition that Russia and China and others have already gotten. And they're absolutely off to the races to not only double down on nuclear, but to use it as this geostrategic advantage vice the United States.
How do you think we can get the policy community, just generally speaking, to view nuclear energy as an important way forward for on the one side of the aisle, they might focus more on the national security implications of domestic energy production, which is true and real. On the other side of the aisle, they'll be focusing, of course, on the clean energy component of it for CO2 emissions purposes. But it feels like nuclear could make both sides happy. So how do we get both sides to see this?
Actually, I think we're already getting there. I would argue that nuclear is the most bipartisan supported energy sector. I have worked under multiple administrations, 6 presidents, and I've never seen the stars in alignment like I've seen now with regards to bipartisan support. On the Hill, I see it firsthand for Democrats and Republicans for different reasons, and some for the same reasons. So I think we're in a strong position. I still think that certainly the industry, we need to continue to convey the opportunities to address one of the last greatest challenges in the public perception perspective, and that is what to do with the waste. The fact is, it's not waste. We only use about 4% of the energy value in the fuel that goes through our country's nuclear reactors. When it's pulled out, it's at one of its highest level of radiotoxicities, yes, but it has 96% or so of the energy left. And so we, for example, the company I'm with and others in the U.S. industry, we're ready to offer the solution and turn this into a national asset. The used nuclear fuel around the country, 86,000 metric tons in 75 locations. It is not a waste by any stretch of the imagination. Just ask the French, ask the Russians, ask the Chinese. This is a national stockpile of energy, of clean energy. There's enough in the stockpile of used nuclear fuel we have in this country to literally power the United States for 100 years. That's how much value in that. And so it is not a waste. And we have companies like mine who are ready to turn this into a win-win-win value proposition, fully monetize the isotopes and the atoms in there for medical, for energy security, for clean energy, for space-based power sources. So this is not a waste. We need the regulators to set it up where we can have a streamlined process for the industry to solve this problem once and for all.
Ed, appreciate the expertise. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
Negotiations continue between Russia and Ukraine, with Moscow offering to end hostilities if the Ukrainian government complies with a list of its demands. So, should Ukraine try to take this off-ramp? Is it a real off-ramp? Host of Human Events Daily, Jack Posobiec, gives us his opinion when we come back. Russia claiming a ceasefire in Ukraine, saying it will hold fire to give civilians a chance to get out. This, as the United Nations claims, more than 1.7 million Ukrainians have fled the country since the war began. That's a refugee crisis of a scale not seen in Europe since World War II. Yesterday, Ukraine's President Zelensky slammed Western leaders for not doing enough. Watch.
This is murder, deliberate murder. The aggressor's audacity is a clear signal to the West that sanctions imposed against Russia are not enough. For they haven't got them, they haven't felt them over there. They've not noticed that the world is truly resolute, truly seeking to stop this war. You will not hide from this reality.
In the meantime, Russia has told Ukraine it is ready to halt military operations, quote, in a moment, if Kyiv meets a list of conditions. This is according to a Kremlin spokesman today. They're demanding that Ukraine cease military action, change its constitution to enshrine neutrality, acknowledge Crimea as Russian territory, and recognize the separatist republics of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states. So, should Zelensky take the deal? Our next guest says yes. Jack Posobiec, host of Human Events Daily, joins me now to discuss this. Jack, good to see you.
Hey, Buck, always a pleasure.
Tell us why. Tell us how. What do you think about this? Is it, first of all, is it an offer made in seriousness? Do you think the Russians would actually stop if these conditions were met? And then analyze for us why you think that is or is not the right move for Zelensky.
Well, I think it's quite interesting, right? One of the biggest things that I've been looking for in all of the speeches from Putin and from Lavrov, Peskov, the spokesman there in the Kremlin, is have they asked once for Zelensky to step down? And you haven't actually heard that yet. You haven't heard them once say that one of their demands that he should be stepped down or that he should be, arrested or, exiled from the country like Yanukovych, who had to flee in 2014. None of that stuff, right? None of that stuff has been asked for. And so I think that Zelensky should say something along the lines of, we're willing to discuss this, hold the ceasefire while we're holding discussions and negotiations, but at the same time, he has to get guarantees in. Look, you can't just have these Russian preconditions. You also have to have your own conditions. So those conditions should include bringing in peacekeepers from the United Nations, find a neutral third party, maybe a non-NATO source to come in and be those peacekeepers, bring other people in who could be observers, who can actually see what's going on the ground, and then absolutely demand that the Russian military forces begin to fall back to their original positions, whether that be across the border in Russia or back down all the way in Kiev. Obviously, now look, we just heard from the Pentagon today earlier that Russia has committed nearly 95% of at least its combat power forward into Ukraine, and that it doesn't look like they're mobilizing any more troops from inside of Russian territory towards Ukraine. What does this mean? That means that essentially their operational forces that are in there, those are the ones that are going to be sent. They're not looking for wider operations, which means that yes, Russia clearly is willing to go tit for tat all the way up through Kiev. But do you really want to put the entire city of Kiev under siege conditions? Do you want these artillery barrages? Do you want this massive bombardment that we've seen from the skies? I think the best thing to do, quite frankly, is to sue for peace as soon as possible. And by the way, you mentioned 1.7 million refugees. Well, guess what? The population of Ukraine is upwards of 40 million people. That means there's about 38, 39 million people that are still stuck in the middle of all of this. Now, hopefully, a lot of those people are in the West, where we haven't seen a lot of the fighting. But at the same time, for all of those people who are trapped behind these active combat operations, right, they're in the path of all of this. They are in the direct line of fire. My thoughts really are with those people and those refugees at this time.
Jack, you mentioned preconditions being a necessary component of the negotiations from the Zelensky Ukrainian side of the table. Is there anything in the Russian list of demands that you think is essentially a deal breaker at this phase?
Well, look, I think Russia has clearly made their point. They are not willing to allow Ukraine to go into NATO, right? Heard and answered, right? When it comes to Crimea, when it comes to Donbass, look, the Russians were never going to give up Crimea for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, it is one of their only warm water ports. Russia, by and large, and I say this with my former naval officer hat on, is by and large a landlocked country. Certainly for most parts of the year, those northern ports can't be used because they're covered in ice. Obviously, that's changing a little bit in recent years. But when it comes down to it, that Black Sea fleet and their access to the Mediterranean is one of the most important commercial and military strategic features of Russia. They were never going to allow Crimea to be turned over. That being said, you have to find from the United States, Ukraine, and Russia, we have to find a way to balance this entire situation out. Whether that right balance, right, includes the Ukraine in NATO, in the EU, doesn't look like that's in the cards right now. So, okay, what do you do from that starting point to then prevent the killing from continuing?
Jack, I want to switch gears here for a second, bring the conversation back home. Something else that I know you're following closely. There's a trucker convoy here in America. We spent a lot of time, and you and I talked about the trucker convoy in Canada, but the trucker convoy here has come to a halt, it seems, right now. Here's a leader of the anti-COVID mandates and restrictions trucker convoy telling the crowd in Maryland the plan is to not enter D.C. Watch this, everyone.
I am fearful, Brian Brazzi and the organizers are fearful of them trying to do to us what they did to those involved in January 6th. It is our belief that they will try to do that. So with that said, we are making diplomatic moves. That means that we're not that means at this time, meaning today and tomorrow, we are not and will not go into D.C. proper.
What do you think about that decision, Jack? And just more generally, what are your thoughts on the tactics here, the strategy really behind this convoy? Is this the right move? Do we need this?
Well, look, I think that is the right move. And again, we're talking about making adult decisions versus making emotional decisions. And I get it, right? I get wanting to go all the way into DC and, kind of give your thumb to the establishment and show them what's up. But let's take a step back as well and also consider the strategic goals of this. The strategic goals of the convoy was a dropping of the mandates and a relaxation on the COVID restrictions writ large. That's already happening. Remember, DC dropped their mandate even before long before the trucker convoy got even close to DC. In fact, it was still in the planning stages when DC Mayor Muriel Bowser decided that she was going to drop. I think it was only in effect for about 3 weeks, right? So I think that their strategic goals and strategic objectives have been met at this point. I think it's a very wise decision for them not to go into DC and risk entering into that powder keg where one spark could have turned into something monumentally worse for them, or even like what we saw in Ottawa. I think it's a very smart decision. I think it's a very adult decision, and I believe that they've certainly made their voice heard. And by the way, they're able to come home with their strategic goals having been achieved.
So, just to be clear, Jack, it seems like is the convoy effectively going to disband at this stage?
I think that's what we're going to see. I think you're going to see people start heading back. It doesn't look, it wouldn't surprise me if a couple of them do kind of make their way down DC, but, we're not going to see an occupation of DC or the sort of Occupy DC kind of movement the way that you saw up in Ottawa, the way that was going on for, I believe it was almost 4 weeks of people out there protesting. And again, our mandates were not as onerous as the ones in Canada. And at the same time, our cross-border trade is not as necessary for the United States and for American truckers as it is for Canada and Canadian truckers. That's why these mandates were such a bigger deal up in Canada than they are here.
Jack, thanks so much, man. Good to see you.
Buck, always a pleasure.
All right, let's take a little break from Ukraine, the war, all of that stuff for a moment here, and switch gears. NFTs, non-fungible tokens, they're having a major impact in the world of collectibles, with some fetching millions of dollars in the open market. So what is an NFT? When we come back, we'll talk to an expert on the topic, the project creator of Angel Baby Hit Squad, Nick Caridi. Stay with us. They're called non-fungible tokens, or NFTs for short. They're the latest in so-called digital assets, with some fetching millions of dollars at auction. In December of last year, an NFT called The Merge by digital artist Pack sold for $91.8 million, setting a record for a piece of artwork sold publicly by a living artist. So what exactly is an NFT, and is this the future or a passing fad? Nick Caridi is an expert on the topic and the project creator of Angel Baby Hit Squad. He joins me now. Nick, good to see you.
Nice to see you too. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. So NFTs are a booming market. Tell us in layman's terms, what the heck is an NFT?
So yeah, it's a hard thing to get your head around as somebody coming into the space initially. But I think it's important to separate it into two different ideas. So initially, the NFT stands for non-fungible token. So the important part is the non-fungible part of this. So non-fungible means it's not replicatable. You can't make it again. So what that means is it's verified on the blockchain as being exactly what it's supposed to be. So in terms of an NFT, it's like if you could prove on the blockchain that this specific piece of artwork is created by the artist, and then you could track it back to that artist creating it. So it can't be copied, it can't be replaceable. As in, if you just had 1,000 copies of one baseball card, that's all fungible tokens, basically. But if you had a one-of-one baseball card, that would be a non-fungible token, if that makes sense.
Sure. So how are these either different from or related to digital currencies like Bitcoin?
Well, that's what it is. It's verified on the blockchain. So the blockchain is basically like a ledger where everything is trustless, where you could see the previous history of all transactions that's ever happened on your computer and through a network of everybody's computers. So basically, there's nobody that you have to rely on to trust the information. You could just look at the history of the entire blockchain and trust that history. As in, if you were to send somebody money from my bank account to your bank account, you would have to trust the bank in the middle to handle the money, take out the money from my bank account and put it into your bank account, and trust that they would adjust each account accordingly. Whereas if you were to look on the blockchain, that is the public record. So all you have to do is look on the public record, and you could see I sent this amount. That's verified that I have this amount in my wallet. I sent it out of my wallet, and I went into yours automatically, and that's all verifiable there.
So Nick, I mean, there seems to be a really high demand for some of these NFTs, millions and millions of dollars, right? I mean, people are spending what seem like crazy amounts of money for them. To folks at home, are they just digital pictures though? Like, why are people paying so much for them?
I think you have to look at human culture, I guess. Like if you look at gaming, Fortnite and Minecraft, and people are paying hundreds of, if not thousands of dollars for these digital skins. So if your character in Fortnite would be running around with a different look than anybody else who's playing the game, and it's really it's a form of clout. It's a form of wanting to show off, and the fact that you can verify that these are legitimate assets on the blockchain, and you could verify that this is your access token to this digital community. This is your access token to this club. This is your basically, yeah. It's basically just showing off to the people that you surround yourself with that these are legitimate assets.
How is this going to grow, you think, Nick? I mean, where are NFTs going?
Well, I mean, it could absolutely be seen as a bubble, but I think the underlying technology is what's here to stay. So what really matters is the fact that these are all public ledger now. So you could verify transactions, whether it be the digital art that people are selling for $90 million now, $100 million now. But you could use this for extensions into hospital records, into ID records, and into transactions of houses. Imagine if it was so easy that you could just say, here, I'm transferring the lease to you, and then it's yours. And you could see it without the middleman of all these 50 different pieces of paperwork. So it's I believe the underlying technology is here to stay, and it's just a matter of which projects, which creations outlast the bubble.
And Nick, tell me a little more about your project, Angel Baby Hit Squad.
Yeah. So my project was I got initially introduced to Cardano, which is a different blockchain. So there's Ethereum, there's Bitcoin, there's Cardano, there's a bunch of different ones that you could build NFTs on. So I wanted to kind of create something that nobody's created before, which was a bridge of two different blockchains. So what my project is it's an Ethereum NFT but with the utility on Cardano. So by owning the Ethereum NFT, you get airdrops of free NFTs on the Cardano blockchain. So by owning one, you'll get 11 Cardano NFT airdrops, as well as access to different in real life utilities, such as I have a party in Las Vegas that you get access to, a club in LA that you get access to, and so much more.
Nick, thank you for explaining this. It's great for me too, because I feel like I'm going to have to, and other folks will have to watch this interview back a few times to kind of really get into it and understand what's going on. But you laid it out for us very well. We appreciate that. Angel Baby Hit Squad is your project. And thanks for being with us, Nicholas Caridi.
Thank you so much.
That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is next. Shields high.